right, everybody's ready for the last one? Here's the last question. How many quality hours did you spend last week with your spouse or family? Now, if you're not married, then this would be time with yourself. Time focused on yourself or with your family. You have family even if you're not married. So how many quality hours did you spend with your family and or spouse? Kind of think of it in that category, if you would. And again, you're putting a number down here. And again, it can't be more than 168 hours. Really, those two numbers together can't add up to more than 168 hours because there's 168 hours in every week. So if you're over that, you added wrong. All right, everybody got those three done? That wasn't too difficult, was it? So you should have two numbers, and then you should have the definition for cheat on your piece of paper. Now, let's go back to the first question. What does it mean to cheat? Okay? When we cheat, we choose to give one thing up in hopes of getting something else of greater value in return. Right? So if I'm going to cheat, that would be the definition I'd use. If I'm going to cheat, I'm giving up one thing to gain something else in return that I think or feel is of greater value. All right? So for instance, a student might give up their integrity to get a better grade. I will look over here at my neighbor's test with hopes that I will get an A rather than a B. So I just cheated, right? I gave up one thing to gain something that I feel is better value. A salesman might give up their integrity to make the sale, right? They might give up their honesty to make the sale, like not share all the details about this used car that they're trying to sell you. And we know what that's like. So, but they're cheating to gain something they think is better. Or here's a better example maybe all of us can relate to at times. Taxpayers are tempted every year to cheat on their taxes in hopes of getting a little bit more money in return or keeping a little bit more of our own money. So we're willing and tempted to give up honesty and credibility or whatever word you want to say with hopes to keep a little bit more money. A while back ago, someone gave me a book called Choosing to Cheat. Anybody ever read this book? Just a handful of you in here. This is a great book. I would encourage you to read it. When I first saw it and someone gave it to me, I'm like, what in the world? And I knew the guy's name on there, a guy named Andy Stanley. He's a pastor down in Georgia. And I thought, why is he writing about how to cheat? Because when I thought of cheat, I thought of negative. I thought of it in a negative light, and what in the world is that all about? But I began to read it, and I found it very helpful. It encouraged some of the choices I'd made in my life, and it encouraged me to continue to make the right choices. Because the book's really not so much about cheating, it's about priorities. It's about choosing the right priorities. So some of the things I'm going to share today come from some of the principles in that book. And I would encourage you to go out and buy that if the things we're going to talk about today resonate in your heart. Stanley says in his book, he says, choosing to cheat is referring to the decision to give up one thing in order to gain something else. So I'm going to give this thing up so I can gain that. The book's all about establishing priorities. A priority is something that you put ahead of something else. If I say that this is a priority, then it goes ahead of other things that I don't think are as important. A priority is saying yes to something, and it even means saying no to other things that are important. I mean, if I say that this is important, it doesn't mean the other things aren't important. They're just not as important, right? So it's setting priorities. Both work and family are very important, right? Or work and ministry, or family and ministry, however you want to say it. They're both important aspects of our lives. But I would venture to say, even though they're both important aspects of our life, they don't play the same role in our life. Nor should they play the same importance in our life. They're not the same thing. Think of it like this. Work/ministry, if you would, is about doing, right? It's task related. We've heard a lot of workshops on how we can do our ministry better, how we can do this better, what we can do there better. It's task oriented. We do our jobs. We do our ministry. But family's not about doing. It's about being. Think about that. Family is about being. No matter if it's the family of God that you're a part of, and you're a child of God, or if it's the family that you have here on earth, or it's your role as a parent, or as a husband, or a wife, it's about being. It's relationship focused. We love our families, right? We love our families. We do our jobs. We do our ministries. When we begin to love our ministries and do our families, that's not good. We're in trouble. But I've known many people that they do their family, but they love their ministry. And they've reversed that. Ministry's about doing. Family's about being. Early in ministry, I was fortunate. I got saved when I was 17 years old and got involved in ministry when I was 18 years old. And I was fortunate to have some good pastors in my life that helped me with priorities, melding and shaping my life and mentoring me on what should be important and how I should establish the priorities of my life. And the way I was taught early on in life was 3 things. God's number one. God is number one focus. Nothing's more important than God. He's number one priority. You may have heard this. Maybe you've been taught this yourself. It's a good thing to live by. Number 2, or next, is my family, my wife, my children, whatever the case is. They're number 2. Read Timothy. It talks about the importance of, if you're a leader, you better have your family in order first. So number 2 is my family. And then number 3 is my ministry. Number 3 is my ministry. But it's tempting so often to take ministry and slide it up next to God because I'm doing it for God. So then I guess it's equal to God. But you remember, you're doing it for God. It's not being. It's not the same. And you need to keep it in the right order. This is what I was taught, and this is how I've tried to, establish my life and how I live my life. Now it's easy. Now that's easier said than done, isn't it? Though I mean, we can know that that's the way we should do our priorities, and God should be first, our family next, our ministry third. But work screams louder, pushes harder, and requires more. So we think in our brain. But the reality is this: if we neglect our family and we neglect our relationship with God, the silent screams of our family will push us to the edge and cost us more than we ever wanted to pay. So it's important that we keep them in the right order. You know what your family wants? And this is something I learned from this book, and I think it's so true. Your family wants 3 things from you. Your spouse or your children or whatever the case is, they want to feel like you're a priority, like they're a priority in your life. Number 1. Number 2, they want to see them on your schedule. Okay? They want to see themselves on your schedule, and they want your loyalty. They want your loyalty. Let me read from the book. Here's a quote from the book that Stanley writes. He says, "When you take loyalty that belongs to your family and give it to someone else, your boss, your manager, your supervisor, your coworker, your potential clients or investors, family members don't feel as if you aren't being as loyal as you should. They feel rejected." Let me draw you a little picture. I don't know about you, if you're anything like me, but sometimes I have a hard time leaving the ministry and going home and shutting that off, if you would. There's always another phone call I could make. There's always another meeting I could have. There's always another event I could plan. There's always another student I could take out. There's always something else I could do. It never ends. I'm convinced that it never ends. There's always more and more I could do. So at times I get a hard time shutting it off and getting in my car and just going home because I could do more and more and more. And so there's times where I've told my wife more often than I want to admit that, hey, I'm going to be home at this time, and I show up 30, 40 minutes late. And you know what? I might be able to get away with that 1 or 2 times or a couple times, but the reality is if I make a routine of that, it causes a conflict. It causes a conflict in our life and in our relationship and in our family. And the reason why it causes a conflict is this: because she begins to feel rejected and unimportant and devalued. She knows that I wouldn't do that for anyone else. She knows that I wouldn't make anyone else wait 30 minutes, so why would I make her wait for 30 minutes? But I still struggle with it. Still deal with it. Because that work screaming, that ministry screaming, there's always more need, there's always more things that I could do. Jesus himself said that the poor will always be amongst you. When they got mad because the woman anointed him with that expensive perfume. Remember that? He said the problem's not going to go away. There's always going to be need. It's figuring out how to balance that and work that in your life and keep your priorities in the right order. When we cheat our family, it translates many times to them as rejection. Now, I'm going to stop there and say something else before I go on to the rest of what I want to talk about. In no way am I saying today, and the rest of what I'm going to say, am I advocating that you should be lazy. Okay? So make sure you hear me. I'm not saying you should be lazy. If you've been around me, you've worked with me, you know my heart, you've heard me probably even say this. I believe, and now I'll say it for those who are in full-time ministry, I think in full-time ministry we should work 40 hours for our paycheck, or whatever we agreed to work. And then we should work an additional 5 to 15 hours every week that we would volunteer. Now, if you get paid for 20 hours, then you should do that, and then you should work an additional hours for volunteer. And the reason why I believe that is, how can I lead volunteers and ask them to go work 40, 60, 80 hours a week like my brother back here does, and then say, oh, and by the way, will you come down and help me with this at the church and serve the church for another 5 to 10 hours? If I'm not willing to do that, what kind of example am I? I believe that I need to be volunteering my time just as anyone else should be, as I would ask them to do. If I think, well, I could turn the clock off after 40 hours because I did my time, I'm not a very good example to the people I'm leading when I'm asking them to volunteer. So I'm not advocating laziness. I'm saying we need to be a great example of those that we lead. We had a young lady in our church that, her name was Judy, that helped us for many years in our ministry as a volunteer. She managed one of the department stores in town. She would get up early in the morning. She'd work all day. She'd get off work at 5. She'd come straight from work to our ministry. She'd give us about 3 hours that night, and then she'd drive home about 45 minutes every week. There was times she'd come and she said, I got a migraine headache. And I'd even tell her, let's just go home. She says, no, I'm okay. She made a commitment, and she was committed to the volunteer time that she said, I'm going to commit to serve this church and this ministry. How could I not do the same? So I'm not advocating laziness. I'm not advocating that at all. But I am talking about priorities. Now, Daniel chapter 1 is an interesting book in the Bible. Most of us are familiar with Daniel chapter 1. So we're not going to read the story because it's the story of Daniel in the king's court. We know that, him and his 3 buddies, they got captured and brought to Babylon, and the king decides to pick out these 4 from amongst who knows how many, and he sees something in them that he likes, and he says, we're going to make them servants in my court. And we're going to put them, they're going to eat exactly what I eat, and we're going to make them the most fit and the best people around. But that was a problem for these 4 because God's law wouldn't allow them to eat certain things. So they're trying to figure out, what are we going to do? They're in a predicament. And many times, much like we are in our lives, because you got 2 different parties pushing and pulling at you from all sides. And you have to make a decision. What am I going to do? And Daniel's decision was simply this. He could satisfy his earthly king with hopes that his heavenly king would understand. How many times have we fell into that one? Or he could satisfy his heavenly king with hopes that his earthly king would understand. Now, I think we all know in our heart which one's the right thing to do. But it's not as easy, again, as it is said. Daniel had to make a choice, and the choice had to do with loyalty. Who was he going to be loyal to? It had to do with priority. How is he going to set his priorities? Daniel was tested by what was going to come into his mouth. Would I eat this thing? Now, I don't think that's necessarily our test today as leaders. I think our test is we're tested by what we're going to put on our schedule, what we're going to put on our calendar, and where it's going to fit on our calendar, and what level of priority it's going to be. But we still have the same type of test of people pulling at us, and we have to decide priorities and we have to decide loyalties. And I learned a long time ago that the good, many times, is the enemy of the best. Just because it sounds good and someone throws it out at you and you think your ministry should be a part of that or you should be a part of this, doesn't mean it's God. There's a lot of good things out there that God doesn't necessarily want us to do. We have to determine what's the best for what God wants me to do. I want the best. I don't want to settle for the good. And to get the best, sometimes I have to say no to the good. I have to prioritize my life in a way that will honor God and live up to the priorities that He would have me live by and would honor Him. So this is the situation Daniel's in, much like sometimes we feel like we're in. And it says here in chapter 1, verses 8 and 9, let me read it to you. It says, but Daniel was determined, after he heard what was going to happen, he says, he was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and the wine given to them by the king. So it says he asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat those unacceptable foods. Now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. I think this thing just went off, so I don't think I need it. I think the battery's just about dead. Everybody can hear me all right? God inspired Daniel with an idea. So he's in this predicament, he's in this challenge, he's going, oh no, what's going to happen? But the reality is God gave him an idea. He said, this is an idea that you can do that will help you make the right choice. And it required Daniel to do three things. And I want you to look at these three things, because I think as we're in the same situation at times where everything's pulling at us and we have to decide what's priority and what's not, if we follow the same plan that Daniel did, and that Andy Stanley so well points out in his book, it will help us to make the right choice and be able to live in priorities in a way that honor God. And so it was required three things. The number one thing was this: Daniel had to make up his mind. He had to make up his mind what his priorities were. What was first important, what was second important, what was third important, and so forth. He had to make up his mind that he was going to be loyal to that priority list. Loyal to God's plan, if you would. And so making up your mind is all about deciding, thank you very, very much, for deciding to reprioritize your world around God's plan, which I believe is God, family, and ministry / work. Giving up good things for the sake of what's best is not easy, though. It doesn't make it necessarily any easier when you're convinced that it's right. You still got to deal with it. But when we choose to be loyal to God's priorities, Andy Stanley points out in his book, he says that he has this little phrase, the now God factor kicks in. I love that. In the Word of God, when we just read, I think it's verse 9, it says, after Daniel made up his mind, it says, now God gave him favor with the chief of staff. The now God factor kicks in. So, but what did Daniel have to do? He had to determine, first of all, in his mind. He had to make up his mind. And when he made up his mind, God said, I'm going to help you now. The now God factor kicks in. Okay, now you're going to get some favor because you chose the right thing. You did the right thing. You passed the test. For the now God factor to kick in, we first must make up our mind. The second thing that was required of Daniel to do was this. Daniel had to come up with a plan. Now, we've heard lots of great plans this week. Man, I sat in a little bit of every one of our workshops. We heard about time management in here at the end, and we could have all kinds of plans. I sat in the children's church one. There's a great plan that was presented there. There was a great plan that was presented in Dwayne's. So there's all kinds of plans, but you got to come up with a plan. You got to have a plan. When we readjust our priorities and our schedule to match the plan that God has given us, a couple things happen. First of all, we begin to choose and not react. When it comes to your schedule, my feeling is this: I need to be choosing what I put on my schedule, not reacting to what gets on my schedule. Okay? Because the other thing is this: if I don't choose what goes on my schedule, guess what? You're exactly right. Someone else chooses what gets on my schedule. If I don't get to choose what's priority, what's agenda in my life, someone else sets my agenda for me. And the reality is it's probably not the agenda that I really want. It's probably not the schedule that I want. It's not the one that I would choose. But because I chose not to choose, someone else chooses for me. So you got to come up with a plan. You got to make a choice and not react to it. And then once you've done that and you've set your plan, Daniel did three things that I would advise you to do in your own life. And you may not have to do all of them, but you certainly have to do one of them. The first thing that he did was he asked for permission. He was in a situation where he couldn't set his own schedule or his own agenda, make up his own mind on his own, so he asked for permission. He went to his supervisor and said, this is what I want to try. Would you let me do it? And maybe you're in a situation where you don't need to do that. You're not accountable to your boss. You're not accountable to, in that sense, you set your own schedule. You're self-employed. Your pastor doesn't care as long as you get the job done. You may not have to do that. But if you're in a situation where you need to do that, then you should do that. The second thing that Daniel did is he did this. He listened to his supervisor. When he asked his supervisor for permission, he didn't keep talking. He shut up and he listened to the supervisor's response and concerns. It'd be good for us to shut up sometimes and listen to what our pastor's saying. to shut up sometimes and listen to what our boss is saying and hear their heart and hear what they want. And so go with the plan, but then listen to their response and listen to what they have to say. And you may or may not have to do that step, depending on the situation that you're in. But the third thing I think we all need to do, and that's this. He set up a test run. He said, give us 10 days. This is what we're going to do. Here's the test run. See if it doesn't work. I think that's a good plan for all of us in here. If you want to change your agenda, change your schedule, change how you do things, set up a test run. Give it a try. See how it works out. Because that leads to the third thing that was required of Daniel to do, and that was Daniel had to take the test. He had to do the test run. Daniel's employers, notice this is so important that you catch this. Daniel's employer was not so much concerned about what he ate or his diet, he was concerned about his performance. Why did the king want him to eat these things? Because he wanted them to perform above everyone else. It wasn't the diet that was the big deal, it was the performance. And you know what? I'm convinced that that's pretty much the same today in our own lives, no matter if we're working in the secular world or in the church. Our employers, our bosses, our supervisors, our pastors, they're looking for performance. Not so much how it gets done, but is it getting done? That's the key thing. How are you going to perform? And I think we perform better whenever we put our life in the priority that God would have us do that's healthy and right. The tester run allows you to see if the new plan's going to work. Is this going to work? And if needed, we can readjust the schedule. But remember, you're looking for three things. You're looking for balance, you're looking for health, and you're looking for effectiveness or performance. So when you're looking at the test run and you look back after your period of test, ask yourself, is this healthy for me and my family? Is this good for my priorities? Am I balancing my life out in a way that honors God? And then number three, is it effective? If it's not working, you might have to try something else. But you got to do the test run. See, when we choose to cheat, and that's the premise of the book, when we choose to cheat, what happens is we readjust our priorities to God's plan, and we end up with a better result. Let me read you this. Daniel chapter 1, verse 17. After the plan and after the test, look what it says here. It says, God gave these 4 men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. An unusual aptitude. God gave that to them. They were effective. It goes on and says, and God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meaning of visions and dreams. You end up with a better result. Sometimes we're scared to readjust our schedule into this order that I'm sharing because we go, I got too much work to do. It's not going to get done. The reality is if you do it the way God wants you to do it, it'll get done. And it'll get done a better way, in a way that honors Him and that pleases Him. But we have to be willing to cheat sometimes and put things in the right order and give up something for something else. Stanley writes in his book, he writes this, God honors those who honor Him. Honor Him at home and experience His blessing there. Honor Him in the marketplace and look for Him to show up there as well. It's about honoring. Daniel honored God. He said, I'm not going to do that, so there has to be a plan out of this. Let me read you one more thing from the book and then we'll finish. This is probably the most impacting statement I read in the whole book. It was on page 123 and it said this. He said this, let's face it. Now just listen to this. Just think about this. Let's face it. One day you will come home from the office for the last time. Nobody retires from his or her family to spend his or her final days in the office. Your last day may be 65 when you're retired or 35 when you're laid off. Either way, you're coming home. What and who you come home to will be determined by what and who you choose to cheat between now and then. What do you want to come home to? None of us are irreplaceable. None of us, if we get this mindset, man, if I left this church, everything would collapse. It won't. Trust me. It won't. Because it's God's church. It's not going to collapse. He's not going to let it collapse. None of us are irreplaceable except for in our home. No one can replace you as a dad. No one can replace you as a mom. That's why it needs to take that priority. Because someday, I see it often in the role that I'm in. I see some of our senior pastors that are 60, 70 years old, and they struggle letting go because their identity is all wrapped up in their senior pastor role. They go, I don't know what I'm going to do. But they have to let go someday. We're going to retire. We're all going to get fired or get laid off or get replaced. Someone else is going to do your job someday. It's just that simple. But what are you going to come home to? It's going to be determined what you cheat now. The priorities that you set now. And I want to come home to something that's healthy and strong. Let me finish today by just saying this is a powerful reminder of our priorities and keeping our priorities in the right order. Hebrews chapter 13 says this in verse 7. Hebrews 13:7. Write this one down. It's a good one for all of us who are next generation ministers and leading other kids and students and parents and all those things, because we do that. If we pastor children, if we pastor youth, we pastor their parents. Even though they're not in the room, we still pastor their parents. Don't ever forget that. Matter of fact, I want to stretch your mind here for just a second. You don't just pastor the kids who are coming to your youth group or your children's church. You pastor the kids in your community. The ones who aren't there yet, that you're praying that someday will be there. You're the pastor to the city. Nowhere in the Scripture do we see the pastor of Faith Christian Center. We see the pastor of Ephesus. See that? Pastors to communities. You're a pastor of that community. Get a bigger mindset. But regardless, look what it says here in Hebrews 13:7. Remember your leaders who taught you the Word of God. Think of all the good that comes from their lives and follow the example of their faith. Now, I've always read that with the mind that I need to look at my pastor and remember him and follow his example. But I want you to look at it in reverse. And your kids in your children's church just read that. Your youth in your youth group just read that. And they're told to follow your example. They're told to follow your example and how you live your life. That kind of puts a different spin on it, doesn't it? Because our kids, our youth, are following our lives. My son's watching every one of you in this room. How are you living your life? What does this Christian thing mean? We're examples to this next generation. And kids and youth from all over the state are watching us. They need to be able to look at us as their leaders for an example of a healthy relationship with God, with our spouse, with our family, and with His church. Because they're looking at us for that example. What are they seeing is the question. What are they seeing? They're seeing something. Others are watching us. Who are they seeing us cheat? How are they seeing our priorities? That's the challenge I want to put with you when you go home today. Because you can take all this information, but I really believe if you don't have this area of your life in order, the rest of them won't really matter. Because kids catch our message a lot more than they hear it. They see us, they watch us, and they follow our example, not our message that we preach. We might have great series, we might have great posters, we might have great all this, but the reality, they're looking at Brian and they're saying, what kind of leader is Brian? What kind of person is Brian? How is he at his home? How does he love his wife? Does he love his son? How does he behave? What's his relationship with God like? They're watching us. We have to set a good example to the next generation. And to do that, I believe we have to prioritize our lives in a way that honors God to make it for the long haul. You've heard this before. It's not a sprint ministry. It's a marathon. We have to run to finish the marathon and prepare to finish the marathon well. So when it's all said and done, God looks at you and He says, well done, good and faithful servant. Well done. Stand with me. This is how we're going to finish today. I want you to find I want you to pray for one another before you go home. And if your spouse is here, I want you and your spouse to find maybe another spouse or couple or another individual that's here by themselves, and just take a few minutes to pray for one another before you go home. So does that make sense? Maybe groups of 3, 4, or 5, something like that. So just look around. I don't want anyone left out. So before you start praying Look around and make sure no one's standing by themselves, or there's two people standing by themselves. A husband and a wife. We want husbands and a wife with other husbands and wife, or husbands and wife with a single person or whatever. But no one should be left by themselves, all right? And I just want you to pray for each other. Pray that God would help you prioritize your life in a way that honors Him. Pray for ministry before you go home. If you have a need, you want to share that, do that. When you're done praying, you're free to go. Thank you for coming. Leave your surveys on the way out. We love you. We're here to support you and resource you and value. We're thankful that you gave us your time and your energy to be here, and we're honored that you let us pour into your lives. So God bless you.